In the heart of Tokyo, in the land of the rising sun, an idea was born that would capture the hearts and imaginations of millions around the globe. The idea was extraordinarily simple yet infinitely complex, and to this day, it is one of the greatest success stories in all of multimedia entertainment. It is an inspiring tale born out of a young boy's fascination, evolving into a man's dream to create a world where imagination knows no bounds. This is, of course, the one and only Pokémon, the highest-grossing media franchise ever.
The original Pokémon games on the Game Boy were really successful, and that allowed Satoshi to create an entire empire out of Pokémon. He licensed the company to make a trading card game of Pokémon, and there was also a TV series, an anime series, and both of those things are still going on today.
From just a short, nearly 30-year-long lifespan since its humble beginnings on the Game Boy, the franchise managed to sell around 120 video games, 1,300 anime episodes, as well as trading cards and other merchandise at unfathomable levels. Not to mention having an expansive list of over 1,000 unique creatures, each with their own distinct personality and marketability. Everywhere you go in modern society, you will notice Pokémon there, as if their world and ours are merging.
One of the great things about Pokémon is, at its heart, it's a very social game. So you can play the Pokémon by yourself on whichever console it is you're playing at that point, but really the joy can come from swapping Pokémon with other people and battling them. So that doesn't only go for the game, but with the Pokémon cards, yeah, you can just collect them, but there are huge tournaments all across the world where you can go and meet other Pokémon fans, battle them with your Pokémon cards, and swap them as well. Part of the element of collecting within the game means that you're going to want to reach out to other Pokémon fans so you can try and get more Pokémon in your collection and also share that love of the game.
But what about Pokémon has kept it so popular for all the years? Does it show any signs of stopping? And do you really have what it takes to catch them all? Join us as we take a journey through time itself, uncovering the history of the most successful media franchise of all time. The brains behind Pokémon itself is a man by the name of Satoshi Tajiri, born on August 28, 1965 in Machida, Tokyo.
So the original idea for Pokémon came from Satoshi Tajiri and his hobby, I think, of insect collecting, which was quite popular at the time. And so why not collect bigger animals instead? It's quite a sweet, kind of pastoral inspiration, I suppose. Of course, there are bug Pokemon, but there are Pokemon that are much bigger than that too. That's kind of where the core idea came from.
As a teenager, he became obsessed with arcade machines, which were all the rage in the 70s and 80s. This obsession led to the founding of the independent gaming magazine Game Freak, which gained a following among gaming enthusiasts for being full of useful arcade strategies.
So in the early 80s, Satoshi Tajiri started a games magazine called Game Freak, and he hired an illustrator, Ken Sugimori, to make manga-style illustrations for the magazine.
Sugimori would remain as the lead artist at Game Freak for years to come, and would be responsible for creating most of the designs of the Pokémon and characters fans know and love. Also joining the team at Game Freak was Junichi Masuda, who would go on to become the chief creative fellow at the Pokémon Company years later. The growing popularity in gaming among fans of the magazine and Tajiri himself led to Game Freak becoming a fully fledged video game company. The wildlife areas Tajiri fell in love with growing up slowly vanished as he got older, getting replaced by more industrial urban areas, destroying habitats of the insects he once fondly enjoyed collecting. Creating something that will give children the same experiences Tajiri was fond of growing up was goal number one.
thing about Pokemon is it was quite a newish idea at the moment, and it all revolved around the idea of capturing monsters in these little capsules. It was actually called Capsule Monsters for a bit before it was called Pocket Monsters and then Pokemon.
Tajiri first conceived the idea of Pokemon in 1990. The concept of keeping monsters within balls was also partially inspired by the popular Japanese TV show Ultraman, which Tajiri adored growing up, which in turn was based on the very popular toy-containing gashapon capsules found throughout cities in Japan. It was around this time that Nintendo released their Game Boy handheld system. Tajiri thought the concept of the device being handheld and portable would encourage kids to go outside and would be an excellent fit for this. Because of the portability of the Game Boy, Tajiri decided to rename the game to Pocket Monsters, which would internationally become abbreviated to Pokemon.
They pitched to Nintendo a bunch of times, but eventually Shigeru Miyamoto, who's one of the real bigwigs in the Nintendo world, saw the potential and they agreed to release it on their Game Boy.
The connectivity elements of the handheld were seen as an excellent fit for Tajiri's idea and a great way to bring people together. Thanks to Miyamoto, the project was able to get the green light from Nintendo. And in 1996, the first generation Pokémon games, Red and Blue, were released. As a side note, in Japan they were released as Red and Green initially, and were infamous for being quite glitchy, so a third blue version was released, which is what Red and Blue around the world are built off of. The games are in the genre known as role-playing games, or simply RPG for short, inspired by legendary titles such as Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest.
In the Pokemon games, the idea is that you play as a kid who wants to be a Pokemon trainer. And the idea behind that is that you live in this world where there are all these wild monsters or Pokemon who live there in the wild, but you can capture them and train them and basically battle them against other people. And the idea is that you want to become the best Pokemon trainer in all the land, and also the most iconic line, which is you've got to catch them all. So within the games, you want to catch all of the Pokemon that exist within that game, and then you want to train them, and then you want to become the best Pokemon trainer.
Despite releasing towards the end of the Game Boy's life cycle in 1996, Red and Green were an instant success, selling around 31 million copies globally. Players around the world were instantly captivated by the adventurous gameplay and the connectivity features that brought everyone together in a way no one had seen before. To say Tajiri's dream had come true would truly be an understatement. He achieved his vision without doubt and changed the face of entertainment forever. Pokémania had begun.
Game begin.
The release of the Generation 1 games in 1996 sparked the beginning of a craze known the world over as Pokémania, where it seemed like everyone, everywhere was playing the game.
How do you know a winner when you see it?
It's bright coloured, it looks like nothing else, it's different, it doesn't really look like human, it just is a cuddly character, if you like.
Well, in this case, these cuddly characters have real bite, and if you want to avoid the craze, well, the only thing is you're going to have to lock up your children.
Pokémania really reached its height in the 2000s, but to be honest, it kind of started right from the early days in the late 90s as well. I think because Pokémon is so popular with kids, it really lends itself to merchandising and to tie-ins as well as the game. So obviously there was the anime and the Pokémon cards, but in the early 2000s you could buy pretty much anything with a Pokémon on it, and kids couldn't get enough of it. So you could get anything, you could get a backpack, you could get a lunchbox, you could get clothes, anything you could think of, and people just couldn't get enough. So at that point, kids were desperate for not only the game, not only the cards, but everything that went along with it as well.
Part of Pokémon's success, both then and now, are the Pokémon creatures themselves, ranging in all sorts of shapes, colors, and abilities. Collecting these creatures according to the "Gotta Catch 'em all" tagline was another aspect of the franchise that really drew people close together, and everyone had a favorite. Some notable favorites from this generation include Charizard, Mewtwo, and of course, Pikachu, who proved so likable to the general public that it would serve as the mascot of the series. Part of Pikachu's success is its prominence in the anime, which was another cornerstone of the franchise contributing to Pokémania.
The Pokemon TV series was really successful, both in Japan and internationally. In Japan, the main character was called Satoshi after the creator of Pokemon. But when it was exported over to America and the West, the character was renamed Ash Ketchum, a pun, of course, on Gotta Catch 'em All. In the TV series, Ash Ketchum is a Pokemon trainer, and he wants to be the best Pokemon trainer in the world. And his personal favourite Pokemon is Pikachu. And that's why Pikachu really has come to represent Pokemon as a whole.
I think the reason the anime show and Pokemon in general worked so well was Pikachu. Kids loved him. And I think that they really connected with that character. I think that was really part of it. He was very kind of cute, but also kind of dangerous. And I think it kind of had some appeal to kids. It just connected.
Whereas Japan had to wait a year for the anime to release, the West got to play the games for the first time just as the anime was coming out. In other words, they could play along with the TV show.
Pikachu.
Its name is Pikachu.
Oh, it's so cute, it's the best of all.
You'll see.
Oh, hi, Pikachu.
Audience members from everywhere instantly fell in love with the lead character Ash Ketchum and his iconic Pikachu for their fun attitude and adventurous spirits.
I think everyone in the world recognizes Pikachu, don't they? Pikachu is one of the most iconic mascots you could possibly hope to have. And I think a lot of Pikachu's success stems not just from the games, but mostly, I think, from the Pokemon animated series, the anime. He was Ash Ketchum's best friend. He was his companion. And the fact that he would not go into that Pokeball, he's such a diva, has paid off for him in the long run. He's the most recognizable Pokemon in the entire world.
Pikachu's prominence in the anime led to the production of an anime-inspired revamp of Red and Blue titled Pokémon Yellow Special Pikachu Edition. The anime was even successful enough to warrant the release of a full-length movie, Pokémon the First Movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, which grossed approximately $163 million worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing anime films of all time.
Power they all shared deep inside. I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines.
The anime would, over the years, gradually lose popularity as time went on and the target demographic grew up. But in its heyday, the anime was immense and had tens of millions of viewers worldwide. Numerous movies would also continue to release alongside new seasons of the anime over the years to come, each one showcasing the latest and greatest legendary Pokémon. Another key player in the franchise's success story was certainly the trading card game, or TCG for short, which released shortly after the game's Western release.
Pokemon cards were huge at the time. I mean, schools were banning them because kids were kind of, stealing them off each other. So it became this, huge phenomenon. Pokemon trading cards really kind of established collectible card games alongside Magic the Gathering. Those two really kind of made that a big thing. Before then, card games had largely been playing card related or top trumps type things. This really kind of moved the dial forward to this collectible cards where you'll go and buy more packs hoping to find that rare Pokemon.
During this time, there were even several tournaments held for both the video games and TCG, which gave rise to the competitive scene for each, in which expert players would devise clever strategies utilizing the surprisingly deep mechanics the games received praise for. From t-shirts to toys, books to billboards, Pokémania was also a merchandising sensation. Having 151 cute and marketable critters to pull from meant that there was no shortage of marketable assets to take advantage of. There were also numerous spin-off titles on the Game Boy and N64, which are all beloved by the more nostalgic of fans. Pokémania was an exciting craze like no one had ever seen before, and Game Freak worried that as the momentum died down, people would become less interested in Pokémon, as if it were a fad that would die out soon. Anticipating this loss in popularity, Game Freak worked hard on the sequel to Red and Blue, the Generation 2 games, Gold and Silver. They were designed to be the ultimate Pokémon games and introduced many series staples, including breeding, the day-night cycle, the steel and dark types, as well as 100 new Pokémon and a brand new region to explore. Another iconic introduction to the series was that of shiny Pokémon, ultra-rare variants of Pokémon with different colors. Hunting for these rare Pokémon would later on become a very popular sport on streaming platforms. The games released on the Game Boy Color in 1999 and were an instant success, receiving praise for their enhanced gameplay mechanics and huge levels of content. Talented programmer and later president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, famously aided in development of Gold and Silver by assisting the team in compressing the game data in order to fit in an entire extra region. Without Iwata's help, players would not have been able to explore both Kanto and Johto at the same time. Fan favorites from this generation include Pichu, Marill, and Lugia. Lugia is especially prominent and famous for having been created for the second movie, Pokémon, the Movie 2000, The Power of One, before having first appeared in the games. Despite their worst fears, the Gen 2 games ended up being a massive success and proved conclusively to Game Freak that Pokémon wasn't going anywhere, and so work soon began on the third generation. Pokémon continued its successful streak into the new millennium, with main series games, spin-offs, and the like selling like hotcakes and promising new adventures on the horizon as Nintendo brought out their latest handheld device, the Game Boy Advance. Gen 3, otherwise known as the Advanced Generation, kicked off with the release of Ruby and Sapphire, which were the final games Tajiri was the lead director of. A prominent theme for the design of this generation was that of nature. Once again, Tajiri's childhood experiences played a vital role in influencing the direction of the game. The Hoenn region, within which these games take place, was made to be more of a vibrant tropical land with varied environments, compared to Kanto's more suburban design and Johto's traditional Japanese theming. The antagonistic forces in the Hoenn games, Team Aqua and Team Magma, and their goals to expand the sea and land respectively, represent climate change, reminiscent of the nature Tajiri adored growing up being devastated over the years. Ruby and Sapphire were hugely successful on the GBA and sold a reasonable 16 million worldwide, though this also makes them the second worst selling games in the franchise, selling 7 million less than their predecessors. Gen 3 also saw a slight dip in popularity for a number of reasons. The transition to a new console and the lack of backwards compatibility was a barrier to entry for some. Not everyone owned a GBA. Some may not have bought one simply for already owning a Game Boy and seeing no need to upgrade. New features added such as natures, abilities, and double battles added a lot of complexity to the battle mechanic, which may have been pretty overwhelming for some at first. These also were, and so far are, the only games in the franchise that don't let you transfer over your trained-up Pokémon from the previous generation, meaning die-hard fans of the series had to leave their virtual pals behind. Rather humorously, the Hoenn region itself had many long stretches of gameplay across bodies of water and infamously lost points on certain review platforms as a result of having too much water. The large surge of popularity brought about by Pokémania was on a downward spiral around this time too. The franchise had had so much exposure up until this point that the general public became fatigued and began losing interest. Perhaps being a victim of its own success, the marketing for Pokémon had completely saturated the market, and people were tiring of seeing these creatures every which way they went. Pokémon had primarily been marketed towards children when the first games came out. These same children playing the games and trading cards in the playground would have been off to high school by this point as their interests, much like the Pokémon themselves, evolved. This is also a byproduct of the new millennium, as the shift from the 90s to the 2000s saw a big change in pop culture trends and popularity. In spite of the negativity, Gen 3 are still beloved by fans of the franchise and praised for the mechanics they introduced.
Pokémon has really proved that if you have a really cool product, a really successful idea that really hits it off with kids, you can just keep building on that and you can keep making things that people are going to want to buy. Pokémon is such a huge part of the culture now. Even people who've probably never played the game still know who Pikachu is and have maybe seen the anime even, or at least know someone who's into it. And that's been such a big part of building that Pokémon empire. I think loads of other franchises have taken note and tried to copy that formula.
The TCG did its own thing to try and remedy the dip in popularity during Gen 3, introducing the powerful EX cards, which attracted much of the old competitive crowd, revitalizing interest in the series, which also led to the establishment of the first ever World Championships in 2004. Fan favorites from this generation include Absol, Rayquaza, and Mudkip, the latter of which gaining internet meme popularity in the early 2000s. The English voice of anime protagonist Ash Ketchum was also changed in this generation from Veronica Taylor to Sarah Natacheni, who voiced the young hero all the way until the end of his time in the series. Pokémon began periodically doing remakes of their older games. In this case, the original Gen 1 games that started in all. These were recreations of Red and Blue with improved visuals and mechanics from the Gen 3 games, and introduced wireless connectivity for the first time in the franchise. Whereas in the previous games, a link cable was required to connect two Game Boys together in order to battle the trade with other players. You could now use a wireless adapter which, as the name suggests, allowed players to do these same activities wirelessly, though still facing each other so that the infrared sensors could work. This emphasis on connectivity and wireless interaction would surely pave the way for a fresh new direction for the franchise in the future. The Nintendo DS, originally releasing in 2004, had been a monumental success for Nintendo and had an enormous install base of people of all ages and demographics, utterly captivated by the touchscreen and the online capabilities to an extent never seen before or since. Needless to say, Pokémon had to have a piece of this pie. And so, in 2006, the Gen 4 games, Diamond and Pearl, were released and sparked a huge upsurge in popularity for the franchise. The names Diamond and Pearl, as well as the enhanced version Platinum a couple years later, were meant to represent happiness and value, as Junichi Masuda, taking over from Tajiri as the lead director of the games, wanted to make them the ultimate Pokémon games, much like Gold and Silver, which saw remakes in the form of Heart Gold and Soul Silver in 2010. These games introduced Wi-Fi connection to the series, enabling players from all over the world to battle, trade, and interact online, bringing people together closer than ever. This was such a monumental change for the series and captured the attention of gamers all over the world and remains in the series to this very day. Gen 4 also introduced to the series the physical special split, the return of the day-night cycle, thanks to the internal clock of the DS and 3D environments, bringing a new sense of depth to an otherwise rather graphically flat franchise.
Well, over time, Pokemon's got more graphically advanced. Originally, it's black and white and quite crude. So now it's much more kind of cartoony in its look and looks kind of more realistic in a sense rather than blocky pixels. Also, there's been more and more Pokemon added to the game. So, there's this huge, I guess, kind of fauna of Pokemon out there to play with and to know. I mean, it's gigantic numbers of them, and every new game introduces new ones.
Fan favorites from this generation include Piplup, Arceus, and Lucario, who became very popular for its starring role in the 8th Pokémon movie, as well as its appearance as a fighter in the crossover fighting game, Super Smash Bros. Brawl.
I knew you'd come.
Lucario, what happened to your eyes?
Don't worry about me, Master.
Learning from the mistakes of the past, the Gen 4 games were backwards compatible, meaning that thanks to the capabilities of the DS hardware, players were able to transfer their favorite Pokémon from the GBA games. Seeing as all subsequent games allow for transferring across older Pokémon, it's safe to say that the Gen 4 games are to thank for keeping these memories alive, making the games feel all the more real. 2009 saw the establishment of the first ever Pokémon World Championships, which was a competitive event in which players from all over the globe could compete in a tournament-style setting, as if they were facing the Pokémon League themselves. This event is ongoing to this day and is considered a major esports event whenever it happens. These revolutionary new games weren't without their flaws, however. Being Game Freak's first foray into the DS, the games ran noticeably more sluggish than in previous games, not just in movement speed, but also in text dialogue speed, battle animations, and other graphic elements. This, coupled with pacing issues between gym fights and some long drawn-out routes, made the Gen 4 games gain an infamous reputation for being slow, meandering games, which over time pushed the hardcore fans away. As a possible riposte to this, the subsequent Gen 5 games, Black and White, releasing in 2010, were made to be more robust experiences, and in many ways fixed some of the issues people had with the Gen 4 games. For one, the speed of both the gameplay progression as well as the battle mechanics had been increased. Up until this point, Pokémon had been perceived as becoming rather stale and formulaic, so Black and White were made to be somewhat of a soft reboot for the franchise, which they accomplished in a number of ways. Whereas the Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh games of the past 4 regions had been inspired by regions of Japan in the real world, the Unova region in the Gen 5 games drew inspiration from the state of New York in America. This drastic change in setting gave an organic explanation as to why the Unova region, for the first time since Gen 1, had exclusively brand new Pokémon, with no familiar faces available during the main adventure, not even Pikachu. In fact, it has the most amount of new Pokémon added in at once, being a whopping 156. Fan favorites from this generation include Oshawott, Chandelure, and Zoroark, who was first teased ahead of time and even got its own movie, much like Lucario. Though it never reached the same levels of popularity as Lucario, it is still a fan favorite from the Unova region. The Black and White names for these games not only allude back to the original games by being named after colors, but also the game's story, which is about truth versus ideals. The black and white representing the opposition and duality of the yin-yang symbol. The story itself was seen as surprisingly deep and engaging for Pokémon, and is one of the reasons Black and White, despite selling the worst in the franchise, are so fondly remembered. However, the anime wasn't as lucky. Though still pretty popular worldwide, viewing figures were at an all-time low during the Black and White series of the anime, and the story rather infamously suffered from some bad writing and poor characterization of the main character. The games, however, went from strength to strength. Whereas other generations got a third, enhanced version of the original dual releases with added content, namely Yellow, Crystal, Emerald, and Platinum. The very story-driven Black and White instead had sequel games, Black 2 and White 2, which had a completely unique story and are perhaps the most popular games in the series among the die-hard fans. These Unova games had vastly improved and expansive online functionality in the form of the C-Gear and Entralink, which provided much content for players to enjoy online. By 2012, Pokémon had continued to dominate the handheld gaming space, even with the emergence of mobile gaming and competitors such as the PSP. This was also around the time Nintendo revealed their next handheld system, the 3DS, a handheld device capable of 3D graphics in stereoscopic 3D. Riding off of the success of the DS era and with this newfound direction for the franchise, Pokémon was poised to leap straight onto this new console, making the leap to 3D at long last. Even so, the DS era of Pokémon is fondly remembered by fans as a beacon of quality for the franchise, and with Gen 5 proving that Game Freak can learn from their mistakes, the future seemed brighter than ever. Now that the stage was set for a true 3D Pokémon adventure, in 2013, Game Freak took the plunge into the third dimension with the Gen 6 games X and Y, set in the French-inspired Kalos region. In an effort to make the most of the brand new 3D graphics, the main theme for the development of these games was that of beauty, which is also why the Kalos region is based on France, a country well known for art, fashion, and things one would consider beautiful. With the games now fully 3D, the team painstakingly created 3D models of the 721 Pokémon available at the time. Game Freak insisted that these models were specifically crafted to be used as evergreen content for the future. And sure enough, most Pokémon still use these same models over a decade later. Despite X and Y having a pretty lukewarm reception by fans and introducing just 72 new Pokémon, the lowest in franchise history, the games did introduce to the franchise several game-changing elements that would leave a lasting impact. In various official tournaments and esports competitions during Gen 5, Dragon-type Pokémon had become overpowered and overused by players for being extremely powerful, having access to moves of the highest power and having very few weaknesses. To combat this, Gen 6 gave us the Fairy type, which was super effective against Dragon, though it has now overtaken the Dragon type as the most powerful type, some might say. X and Y also began the trend in modern Pokémon games of introducing a powerful battle gimmick to draw more players to the game. Their very first attempt arguably remains as the most popular one. Mega Evolution, temporary power-ups in battle which make fan favorites more powerful, and even shed light on some often overlooked ones. Megas were a huge selling point of X and Y, and excited fans when they saw new Mega Evolutions introduced for the first time. However, because of how powerful they are, and because the Kalos region itself had pretty poor level scaling, the Kalos games were seen as too easy and boring by fans of the franchise. Of these 72 new Pokémon, some fan favorites include Aegislash, Zygarde, and Greninja. Greninja in particular was a huge deal, becoming the most popular Pokémon in the world according to a Google poll in 2020. Part of its popularity was likely due to the anime, which, although at an all-time low in terms of viewership, had fans in awe of the storytelling and overall quality improvements compared to the Black and White season. Another reason for its success is due to its role as a playable fighter in Super Smash Bros., which was commissioned by the game's director before Game Freak had even created it, meaning it was created specifically for Smash Bros. Similarly to Gen 4, X and Y also suffered from pacing issues and had a story that didn't satisfy longtime fans, especially coming off of the heels of Black and White with how deep a story that had. Once the novelty of 3D Pokémon died down, fans began to notice how stiff and awkward the creatures looked in 3D, almost as if they lost personality on the shift to 3D. 3D Pokémon was here to stay, however, and it wasn't going anywhere. Learning from their mistakes once again, Game Freak made sure that the Gen 7 games, Sun and Moon, set in the Hawaii-inspired Alola region, had a better focus on story, which it received praise for, much like in Black and White. Also, like in Black and White, Sun and Moon tried to change the formula of the gameplay somewhat. Instead of the usual gym challenge from the previous titles, there was now the Island Challenge, which led to more varied gameplay by having the player compete in various obstacles and challenges. There were also several gameplay additions such as Ride Pokémon, replacing the rather irksome HMs of previous games, as well as the mysterious interdimensional Ultra Beasts and the introduction of regional forms, variants of existing Pokémon with bodies and abilities adapted to the region they're in. The regional forms especially helped to make the Pokémon feel more like living creatures and fleshed out the lore of the world. Fan favorites from this generation include Rowlet, Mimikyu, and Incineroar, yet another addition to Super Smash Bros. The Gen 7 games came out in 2016, which was the 20th year anniversary of the franchise, and saw several exciting celebrations. Perhaps the most important to occur in this period was the release of the mobile juggernaut Pokémon Go. Pokémon Go was hugely monumental for the franchise for ushering in what some may consider a Pokémania 2.0.
Pokémon Go, wow, I mean, that was absolutely huge. It was the first really popular game to use augmented reality technology, where you can point your phone's camera at something and an image of the Pokémon would be superimposed on what you're looking at. And so you could actually go out in the real world and capture Pokémon.
And so you would walk around. It was like kind of based on your real life location, and you could flip your little Pokeballs at them and catch them, and then you could battle them at real world gyms, which were designated locations. So I think for a brief moment in time, I held Buckingham Palace as a Pokemon gym. I mean, for about 5 minutes, and then I was summarily thrown off it again. But that was a really nice summer, was Pokemon Go summer. I remember you'd be like, ordinarily to spot other gamers in the wild, you'd have to like use context clues like, are they wearing any badges or t-shirts or anything? And in that summer, you could spot other gamers by them huddled around certain buildings trying to like take over gyms and stuff. But it was weird because it was like, for a little summer, you were allowed to approach other people and be like, oh, there's a Charizard. No, well, not, you couldn't catch Charizard, but there was like a Charmander just this way. If you go down this street and turn left, it got people out of the house. It got people chatting to strangers, within reason. And I remember like there was huge, like in our office at the time, someone would spot something around the corner, and everyone would leave. Everyone would just rush down the street to try and catch this Pokemon. It's really fun.
Hardcore and casual alike. It seemed everyone, everywhere you'd go, was playing this game. There were public events, people in parks, and complete strangers talking to each other over their shared passion for Pokemon. Though not quite as popular as the initial release, Pokemon Go still remains immensely popular, having a total player count of 81 million players as of 2024, and still gets updated with new content often, even allowing for connectivity between it and the main titles. Some might even say, with how much people came together over Pokemon thanks to this game, Pokemon Go is the closest we've ever come to world peace. Midway into Gen 7's lifespan saw the release of Nintendo's newest console, the Nintendo Switch, which was a revolutionary blend of a handheld and a home console, all in one. The Switch was an instant success, and proved not only to Nintendo, but to Game Freak as well, that they were on to something big. At 2017's E3, a gaming convention in which various companies would announce and unveil new games, it was announced that Game Freak had been working on their next big mainline RPG for this new console. Needless to say, fans were more excited than ever to see how the main series could look on the big screen. The very first games on this hybrid console, 2018's Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, were released and included many elements from Pokémon Go. Utilizing the Joy-Con controllers on the Switch, the game was capable of being played with one hand, and users could freely throw Pokeballs by swinging their arm. Being Game Freak's first Pokémon game on an HD console, they received praise for the high-fidelity visuals and good performance, showcasing the Kanto region in glorious 1080p on the big screen for the first time ever. They did, however, receive criticism for being far too easy and geared towards casual gamers. There were fears that this overly safe and boring Pokémon game was the new direction for the franchise, and that these were the supposed hot new console titles promised at E3. Game Freak, however, assured fans that it wasn't, and early 2019 saw the reveal of the 8th generation games, Sword and Shield. These games were poised to be instant successes for the franchise, and the fans were more excited than ever. The build-up to Sword and Shield and the promise of a flashy new HD adventure for Pokémon made fans the world over anticipate with joy, as well as impatience. Whilst they waited for these hot new titles, there was the release of the very popular movie Pokémon Detective Pikachu, starring Ryan Reynolds as a talking Pikachu, based on a spin-off title for the 3DS.
I know you can't understand me, but put down the stapler or I will electrocute you.
He's like a little, Pikachu in this movie is a little bit like if Deadpool were completely recalibrated for any age group on Earth. So there's still that same sort of kind of acerbic, fun bite that I love doing in films, but it's it's through the lens of Pokemon, which is cool.
The film drew in a big crowd for being a video game-inspired movie, which usually don't do too well commercially or critically, and received praise for depicting all sorts of fan-favorite Pokémon in a realistic art style. Detective Pikachu was a huge success thanks to the collective efforts of the Pokémon Company and Legendary Pictures, and grossed over $449 million worldwide, inspiring the company to promptly work on a sequel. However, the fans were still craving news for the hotly anticipated Sword and Shield. Several trailers revealing brand new features in the Gen 8 games added to this excitement immensely. Pokémon had often been accused of being far too linear in its gameplay, so Game Freak decided to test the waters of what an open world could be with the inclusion of the Wild Area, a location in the game in which players can run around and finally move the camera in a free and open environment. The battle gimmick of this generation was that of Dynamaxing, which saw trainers enlarge their Pokémon to massive sizes, which Game Freak admitted was because of the novelty of having these games, previously restricted to handhelds, now on the big screen. Although initially thought of as a mediocre and pointless addition, it garnered a reputation from competitive players as being the most balanced and competitively viable of these gimmicks. Some fan favorites from this generation include Rillaboom, Dragapult, and Zacian, which all three became competitive juggernauts seemingly overnight. This would also be the final generation to have Ash Ketchum star in the Pokémon anime, who had been the main character ever since 1997. However, the pre-launch period quickly became mired in controversy due to what infamously became known as Dexit, a play on the words Pokédex and Brexit, due to the Galar region's Britain-inspired setting. For the first time in the series' history, not all existing Pokémon would be available in the latest titles, limiting the number of Pokémon available, leading to widespread dissatisfaction among fans. The controversy was exacerbated by concerns over perceived graphical and gameplay shortcomings, with many fans feeling that the games did not meet the high standards expected from a mainline Pokémon release on a more powerful console like the Switch. Much like Gens 4 and 6, apparently a curse with even-numbered generations, fans were dissatisfied with the story and characters present in these games. Despite the harsh critical reception and the vocal dissatisfaction from a portion of the fan base, Sword and Shield went on to become the second best-selling games in the franchise ever. Within the first weekend of release, they sold over 6 million copies worldwide, making them some of the fastest-selling games on the Nintendo Switch. This commercial triumph underscored the enduring popularity of the Pokémon franchise, demonstrating its eternal and unwavering fan base. Towards the end of Generation 8, Pokémon Legends Arceus was released and seemed to be striving to try something completely new, as if learning from fan backlash. The gameplay of this title is radically different, opting to go for a more dynamic, action-oriented style of gameplay which incorporates elements of open-world gameplay as established in Sword and Shield's Wild Area.
And there's even recently been the release of Arceus, which is slightly set apart from the main series, but still has the ability to catch all the Pokemon. But that one is now in a more open world setting, which is something that they've just started to experiment with. And that's really exciting. I'm really hoping to see more open world Pokemon games in the future.
Though not selling all too well for a main installment, Legends Arceus became an instant classic among series fans, and in many ways won over the crowd dissatisfied with the comparatively formulaic and paint-by-numbers Sword and Shield. the success of Pokémon Legends Arceus signaled a potential new direction for future Pokémon games, and even led to a spiritual successor in the form of Legends ZA in 2025. Its emphasis on open-world exploration and a more immersive, narrative-driven experience resonated with both new and veteran players, and would go on to influence Generation 9's Scarlet and Violet, set in the Iberian-inspired Paldea region. For the first time ever for Pokémon, the games were entirely open-world, enabling players to go anywhere they wanted to at any point in the game, truly bringing to life Tajiri's vision of creating a rich, immersive world for everyone to experience. The initial release of the games, however, once again sparked controversy among fans for being very glitchy and full of bugs, some so noticeable that it would cause the game to crash or become inoperable. Because of this, and fans once again being frustrated with the low-quality graphics presented by the highest-grossing media franchise of all time, led to the games being the most poorly received among critics. The Pokémon themselves were starting to show their age. Despite all the texture enhancements brought about between generations, the models were still mostly reused from Generation 6 almost 10 years prior. To many, this showed a certain level of laziness on Game Freak's part, in spite of how financially successful they are. The true fans, however, remained as stalwart as ever and praised the game for the immersion and freedom it offered, once again proving the original vision's success. This generation introduced 107 new Pokémon, pushing the total Pokémon number over the 1,000 mark. One of the new Pokémon introduced was the 1,000th Pokémon, Golden Go, a Pokémon made of pure gold, acting as a trophy of this monumental milestone. Clearly, despite the recent backlash, Pokémon wasn't going to back down. Pokémon is the very best, like no franchise ever was. To play them is your real test. To live them is your cause.
I love Pokémon. I have a huge nostalgic love for them. When I was a kid, they were super popular. It was when they were first getting kind of famous and taking over the world. And I remember the first time I saw a Pokémon game on the Game Boy just being absolutely transfixed by the idea. I'm someone who likes animals and I like monsters and things like that. And so as a kid, it just really, really spoke to me. It was the first time I'd also really engaged with sort of Japanese media. And that also opened loads of doors into kind of anime and into Japanese games. And so I've really got Pokémon to thank for that originally. I also, as an adult, have just continued to really enjoy the Pokémon games. I don't really collect the cards anymore, and I don't necessarily buy that much merchandise, but I will generally still play the main series games, and I still really enjoy them.
I really enjoy the Pokemon games, despite the fact that, like, you know, again, they're very similar every time. I just think there's just a really nice flow to them, and they're just a nice, relaxing game to play. I go for the same Pokemon every time. I cultivate my team the exact same every time, but there's a kind of comfort in that. And I think it's gonna sound cheesy, but like I think the thing that I like about Pokemon is that in the end, like the key thing is always friendship, right? Like you battle your Pokemon together, but it's always like your friendships with the other characters that are gonna elevate you and make you become Pokemon Master in the end.
I mean, I discovered Pokemon when I was already an adult, and I was enjoying the trading card game and the TV series. So as much as I think Pokemon really appeals to children, it really does cross generations, and it appeals to everybody, really.
What made Pokemon stand out was the collection side of things. You know, building up this collection of Pokemon. It was a very different idea. You know, on the surface, kind of Pokemon is a Japanese-style role-playing game, but they didn't really have this collection element. That was really the thing that set it apart.
Never before in media history has a franchise managed to accumulate so many beloved and intricately designed characters before, and many have tried to replicate its success. The basic premise of collecting, battling colorful and creative creatures has been done by such franchises as Digimon, Yokai Watch, and Ni no Kuni. All successful in their own right, but could never live up to the same heights as Pokémon.
Pokemon's legacy is that it inspired a whole generation of games that were really trying to tap into that same energy that it had of collecting, of sharing, of that kind of really interesting, cute character design. I think it also really popularized a lot of things in the West, particularly for kids at that time, that weren't popular until that point, like that kind of anime, that Japanese style of game. And I think the legacy of that is that those games are still super popular today, whether it's Pokemon or one of the many other games that had a kind of similar format that came after. And it really changed the landscape just generally.
However, in early 2024, Pal World released on Steam and became a viral sensation. This game combined elements of popular games such as Breath of the Wild, Fortnite, and of course, Pokémon, and was hugely successful when it came out. Though its popularity dwindled and many people pointed out the blatant plagiarism present within the game, it still came extraordinarily close to being as successful as a mainline Pokémon game. Perhaps the growing competition will encourage Pokémon to make better efforts to ensure the good quality of their future games. Although, as has been proven time and time again, the fandom will never die and will remain till the very end, proving that Pokémon truly is something special, and Tajiri's world is one enjoyed by billions. It's safe to say that the entire world eagerly awaits what the series will evolve into next.